The sickening crack of my spine against the basement stairs echoed through the house, but it was nothing compared to the cold silence that followed. I lay there sprawled at the bottom, staring up at my brother Jake's smirking face. My 16th birthday cake for him lay splattered beside me, blue frosting smeared across the concrete, like evidence of something broken beyond repair. My father loomed at the top of the stairs, his face twisting with familiar disappointment. "Walk it off. Stop being a baby," he barked, as I tried and failed to move my legs. My mother appeared beside him, her eyes narrowing with accusation. "India, how could you ruin Jake's special day with your dramatics?" But when paramedic Tara saw I couldn't move my legs, she immediately called for police backup. The MRI would reveal the truth they had spent years hiding. My name is India Carson, and for 28 years I've lived in the shadow of my little brother Jake. Our family home in suburban Atlanta was a showcase of perfection from the outside. Pristine landscaping matching rocking chairs on the wraparound porch, and family photos displaying 4 smiling faces in perfect coordination. But houses hide things. Ours concealed the truth about who Jake really was, and how far my parents would go to protect their golden child. That day was supposed to be a simple celebration, Jake's 16th birthday. A milestone I almost didn't attend, but grandmother Elaine had called me the night before, her voice trembling with that familiar plea. "India, honey, I know things haven't been easy, but your brother is turning 16. Family should be together for these moments." What Grandma Elaine didn't say, but I knew she thought, was that Jake was getting worse. The signs were there, and she was one of the few who noticed them. She'd been watching with concerned eyes for years, witnessing small cruelties that my parents dismissed. The dead bird she found in her purse after scolding Jake, the way neighborhood pets avoided our yard, the broken wrist I suffered when I was 14, after Jake accidentally knocked me off my bike. I'll think about it. I had promised her, though I had already decided to go. Not for Jake, but for her, and maybe secretly to see if anything had changed. I worked as a physical therapist at Atlanta Memorial, helping people recover from injuries. The irony wasn't lost on me that I spent my days healing others while carrying my own invisible wounds. My apartment across town was my sanctuary, the distance from my family home, a boundary I maintained for sanity. My coworkers knew nothing of my family dynamics. To them I was just India, dedicated, compassionate, perhaps a bit guarded. The morning of Jake's birthday, I arrived early to help with preparations. My mother Heather greeted me with surprised eyes and a stiff hug. "You're actually here," she said, as if my presence was both unexpected and slightly inconvenient. "Jake will be so pleased." He wouldn't be. We both knew that. But the lie hung between us, comfortable in its familiarity. My father Tom was in the backyard, setting up the grill, his broad shoulders, carrying the weight of his successful construction business and family pride. He nodded when he saw me, a gesture that passed for affection in our household. "India, good of you to make time." His words carried a subtle dig about my absence from recent family gatherings. "Wouldn't miss it, Dad." Another comfortable lie. Jake appeared around noon, sleeping in as teenagers do. But there was nothing typical about the way his eyes narrowed when he saw me standing in the kitchen, arranging fruit on a platter. "Well, look who decided to show up," he said, voice dripping with disdain that only I seemed to hear. My mother smiled indulgently at her son, ruffling his hair as if he were still 7 instead of 16. "Be nice, Jake. Your sister took time off work for you." Jake's smile didn't reach his eyes. How generous of her. The afternoon progressed with calculated pleasantries. Neighbors and family friends arrived, bearing gifts and admiration for Jake, star athlete, honor student, the perfect son. Nobody saw how he deliberately bumped my arm when I was carrying drinks, causing me to spill on myself. Nobody noticed when he interrupted every conversation I tried to have. These were old patterns, invisible to everyone but me. Dr. Marcus Allen, my father's longtime friend and golf partner, arrived with his wife. He'd known our family for years, had treated both Jake and me for various childhood injuries. He gave me a long look when Jake playfully shoved me aside to greet him. "How are you really doing, India?" he asked quietly, when we had a moment alone. "I'm fine," I said automatically. The answer expected of me. He nodded, but something in his expression told me he wasn't convinced. "You know, I've always thought you were the strong one in this family." Before I could respond, it was time for cake. My mother had been fussing over the three-tiered blue monstrosity all day. Jake's favorite color, Jake's favorite flavor. I volunteered to retrieve it from the basement refrigerator, where it had been chilling. The basement stairs were steep, poorly lit. I carefully descended, found the cake, and began the slow journey back up, balancing the heavy platter. I was 3 steps from the top when I felt Jake's presence behind me. He had silently followed me down. "Need help, sis?" he asked, his voice unnervingly soft. "I've got it, thanks," I replied, not turning around, focusing on the remaining steps. I felt his breath on my neck, as he leaned close and whispered, "Oops." His hands pressed against my back with startling force. In that suspended moment before falling, I caught Dr. Marcus's horrified expression at the top of the stairs. He had seen everything, but as I tumbled backward, the cake flying from my hands, I watched him step back, his face clouding with the same willful blindness I'd seen in so many adults throughout my childhood. The fall itself was a blur of motion and sharp pain. I remember thinking how strange it was that I could count each step as my body crashed against it. 1, 2, 3, until something in my lower back made a sound no human body should make. When I landed at the bottom, splayed among smashed cake and broken glass from the platter, the world went silent, except for the high-pitched ringing in my ears. I tried to move my legs. Nothing happened. I tried again, concentrating all my mental energy on the simple act of bending my knee. My legs lay there unresponsive, as though they belonged to someone else. Jake stood at the bottom of the stairs, his face a mask of fake concern as footsteps thundered above. "Dad," he called out. India fell. "I think she did it on purpose." The last thing I saw before my family crowded around was Dr. Marcus's face staring down from the top of the stairs, his eyes filled with knowledge he would pretend not to have. Like everyone else who had witnessed Jake's cruelty over the years, he would choose silence, because in our family, protecting Jake was the unwritten rule that trumped everything else. "India, India, can you hear me?" My father's voice boomed above me, more annoyed than concerned. The basement ceiling spun in lazy circles as I tried to focus on his face. "I can't move my legs," I whispered, terror rising in my chest. "Dad, I can't feel anything below my waist." His expression darkened, the familiar shadow of disbelief crossing his features. "You're fine. Just had the wind knocked out of you." My mother appeared beside him, hands fluttering nervously around her face. "The cake is ruined," she said, as if this were the real tragedy unfolding. "Everyone's waiting." Jake stood behind them, his face carefully arranged into a mask of brotherly concern, but I caught the slight twitch at the corner of his mouth, almost a smile. "She just fell, Mom," he said, his voice perfectly calibrated to sound innocent. I tried to catch her, but she was going too fast. The lie slid easily from his lips, as it had countless times before. I wanted to scream the truth, but pain shot through my spine like electricity, stealing my breath and blurring my vision. "Walk it off. Stop being a baby," my father repeated, reaching down to grip my arm. When he tried to pull me up, the pain exploded into something unbearable, and my scream finally silenced the room. "Tom, maybe we should," my mother began uncertainly. "She's doing this for attention," my father cut her off. "You know how she gets around Jake's birthdays." Through tears, I saw my grandmother Elaine push through the small crowd that had gathered at the top of the stairs. "What happened? Let me through." Before anyone could answer, the doorbell rang. My mother looked relieved at the interruption. "That must be Fiona with Jake's gift. I'll get it." Fiona Walsh was our neighbor, a nurse at Grady Memorial, who had recently moved to the neighborhood. I had spoken with her only a few times, but she had struck me as perceptive and kind, qualities in short supply in my family's social circle. What happened next changed everything. I heard Fiona's voice before I saw her, the professional edge cutting through the murmured concerns of party guests. "Excuse me, I'm a nurse. Let me through, please." She appeared at the bottom of the stairs, still wearing scrubs from her shift, her red hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. She took one look at me, and her entire demeanor changed. "Nobody move her," she commanded, kneeling beside me. Her hands were gentle but efficient, as she checked my pulse, looked into my eyes. "India, can you tell me what happened?" I fell down the stairs, I said, aware of my family watching. "I can't move my legs." Fiona's eyes narrowed slightly as she performed a quick neurological assessment, running her fingernail along the bottom of my foot. I watched her do it, but felt nothing. "Can you feel that?" she asked. I shook my head, panic rising. "I'm calling 911, she said, pulling out her phone. My father stepped forward. "That's not necessary. This is a family matter, and India has always been prone to dramatics." Fiona stood, her 5'4" frame somehow towering as she faced my 6-foot father. "Sir, your daughter has signs of possible spinal trauma. She needs immediate medical attention." "You're overreacting," my mother interjected. "It's Jake's birthday. We have guests." Something flashed in Fiona's eyes, recognition perhaps of a dynamic she'd seen before. She stepped away from my parents' phone already at her ear. "This is Fiona Walsh, RN, from Grady Memorial. I need an ambulance at 427 Oakwood Drive. Possible spinal injury. Adult female, approximately 28 years old." What followed was a blur of activity. Guests were ushered out, the party effectively over. Jake performed his disappointment, perfectly accepting sympathetic pats and promises of rain checks with practiced humility. Through it all, I lay on the cold basement floor, pain radiating through my body, in waves, terrified by the silence of my lower limbs. The paramedics arrived within minutes, a blessing of suburban emergency response times. The lead paramedic introduced herself as Tara as she knelt beside me, her dark brown eyes assessing me professionally. "India, I'm going to help you, but I need you to stay very still," she said calmly. "Can you tell me exactly what happened?" Before I could answer, my father interrupted. "She was carrying the cake, lost her balance. Simple accident." Tara didn't look up from her assessment. "I need to hear from the patient, sir." I felt a sudden desperate courage. "I was pushed," I said, my voice barely audible. The room went deadly silent. "What was that?" Tara asked, leaning closer. "I was pushed," I repeated louder this time. "Jake pushed me." "That's a lie," Jake shouted, his careful mask slipping momentarily. "Why would I do that?" My mother rushed to his side. "India, how could you? Haven't you ruined enough of Jake's special day?" Tara exchanged a look with her partner, a stocky man named Steve, who was preparing a backboard. Something unspoken passed between them. "Sir, ma'am, I need everyone to step back and give us room to work," Tara said firmly. As she and Steve stabilized my neck and prepared to transfer me to the backboard, she leaned down and whispered, "Squeeze my hand if you're afraid in this house." I squeezed her hand so hard my knuckles turned white. What I didn't know then was that Tara had noticed several things in quick succession. The defensive posture of my family, the inconsistency in their story, the old bruises on my arms that I'd become adept at hiding, and the clinical signs of severe spinal trauma inconsistent with a simple fall. As they loaded me onto the stretcher, I heard Tara speaking quietly into her radio. "Dispatch, requesting police presence at our location. Situation code 4. Code 4, I would later learn, was their shorthand for suspected abuse. Detective Laura Sanders arrived as they were loading me into the ambulance. She was plain-clothed but unmistakably law enforcement. Something in the way she carried herself observant and slightly apart from the chaos. "I need statements from everyone," she announced, producing a small notebook, starting with the injured party if possible. "This is ridiculous," my father blustered. "My daughter had an accident. We don't need police involvement." Detective Sanders smiled thinly. Standard procedure when paramedics call us in, sir. Nothing to worry about if it was just an accident. As the ambulance doors closed, I caught a glimpse of my family standing in the driveway. My parents, tight-lipped and angry Jake, looking uncertain for the first time, and grandmother Elaine watching with tears streaming down her lined face. What happened over the next few hours was a whirlwind of separate questionings and medical assessments. I learned later that Detective Sanders had interviewed Jake alone away from my parents' influence, and something in that conversation had cracked his carefully constructed facade. It was just a joke, he reportedly said, breaking down when pressed. I didn't mean for her to fall that far. She's always so uptight, especially around my birthdays. I just wanted her to loosen up, but the most damning evidence came from my medical evaluation. As doctors assessed me in the emergency room, their findings painted a disturbing picture, not just the fresh spinal trauma, but evidence of multiple previous injuries that had never been properly treated. A poorly healed wrist fracture from 3 years ago, rib injuries consistent with impact trauma, shoulder damage, suggesting repeated strain. India, the emergency doctor said gently, these injuries tell a story of long-term physical trauma. Is there something you want to tell us? For the first time in my life, protected by the sterile walls of the hospital and the presence of objective witnesses, I told the truth about growing up with Jake, about the accidents that were never accidents, about parents who saw only what they wanted to see, about a lifetime of being told I was oversensitive, dramatic, jealous of my golden brother. And for the first time in my life, someone believed me. The MRI machine hummed around me, a technological cocoon that would reveal what I already felt in the terrifying silence of my lower body. I lay perfectly still, fighting the claustrophobia and the panic that threatened to overwhelm me. The technician's voice came through the speaker, professionally detached, but not unkind. Just a few more minutes, Miss Carson. You're doing great. I closed my eyes and tried to center myself in the chaos of the past few hours. The emergency room had been a blur of nurses, doctors, and police officers. Questions asked and repeated. Forms signed. My family conspicuously absent after Detective Sanders had separated us. When they finally rolled me out of the MRI chamber, Dr. Allison Reed was waiting. She was a neurosurgeon in her 40s, with prematurely silver hair and eyes that missed nothing. India, she said, pulling up a chair beside my gurney. I have your results. The clinical language she used, compression fracture, spinal cord trauma L, 1 vertebra, washed over me like waves. The meaning clear. Despite the medical terminology, my spine was damaged. The question wasn't if I needed surgery, but how soon and how extensive the damage might be. Will I walk again? I interrupted her explanation, needing the bottom line. Dr. Reed paused, her expression carefully neutral. There's reason for optimism. The cord isn't completely severed, which is good news. But I need to be honest with you. Recovery from this kind of injury is unpredictable. We won't know the full extent until after surgery and through your rehabilitation. So, it's possible I won't walk again, I pressed. It's possible, she acknowledged. But it's also possible you'll make a full recovery with proper treatment and therapy. What I can promise you is that we're going to do everything we can. As she explained the surgical procedures scheduled for the following morning, I noticed my parents hovering in the doorway, their faces set in identical expressions of concerned parenthood, the masks they wore so well in public. There she is, my mother said, rushing to my side as if we were close, as if she hadn't accused me of ruining Jake's birthday while I lay paralyzed on the basement floor. We've been so worried. My father stood at the foot of the bed, clearing his throat. The police have been asking a lot of unnecessary questions. Jake is very upset. Dr. Reed watched this interaction with narrowed eyes. Mr. and Mrs. Carson. I was just explaining to India the seriousness of her injury and the surgery we'll be performing tomorrow. Surgery. My mother's hand flew to her throat. Is that really necessary? India has always had a low pain threshold. Perhaps with some rest. Mrs. Carson, Dr. Reed, cut in her voice, cooling several degrees. Your daughter has sustained a severe spinal injury that requires immediate surgical intervention. This is not about pain tolerance. Without surgery, she risks permanent paralysis. My father shifted uncomfortably. Of course we want what's best for India. We're just concerned about rushing into something so drastic. The look Dr. Reed gave him could have frozen fire. I understand you're in shock, but this isn't elective surgery. It's necessary and time-sensitive. A knock at the door interrupted the tense conversation. Peyton Lewis, my best friend since college, stood in the doorway, her eyes wide with worry. We had been scheduled to meet for coffee the next day, and when I didn't show up or answer texts, she had called the hospital on a hunch. India. Her voice broke as she took in the scene. Me immobilized on the gurney, my parents hovering the doctor's protective stance. What happened? Before anyone could answer, a hospital social worker named Megan appeared behind Peyton. Dr. Reed. Could I speak with you and the patient privately? My parents bristled at the implication they should leave. We're her family, my father stated flatly. And India is an adult patient entitled to privacy. During her medical consultations, Megan countered smoothly. Hospital policy. There was no arguing with hospital policy, that nebulous authority that even my father's considerable influence couldn't overcome. With reluctance, my parents stepped out, promising to return soon. Peyton stayed, moving to my side and taking my hand. Dr. Reed nodded at Megan to continue. India. Megan began gently. The police have requested access to your previous medical records as part of their investigation. As an adult, you have the right to consent or decline. Investigation into what I asked, though I knew the answer. The circumstances of your injury, she replied carefully. Detective Sanders has reason to believe this may not have been an accident. I felt Peyton's hand tighten around mine. She had never met my family, had known only the vague outlines of our dysfunction. I had kept her separate from that part of my life, ashamed perhaps, or protective of the one relationship untainted by the Carson family dynamic. What will they find in my records? I asked Dr. Reed. She hesitated, exchanging a glance with Megan. I've reviewed your file from previous admissions to this hospital. There's a pattern, India. Multiple injuries over the years, all explained as accidents, but many consistent with. She paused, choosing her words carefully. Consistent with interpersonal trauma. You mean consistent with someone hurting me? I clarified, a strange calm settling over me. Consistent with my brother hurting me, and my parents covering it up. The words hung in the air, undeniable once spoken aloud. Yes, Dr. Reed confirmed simply. Peyton's face reflected shock. Then, a dawning understanding. The wrist injury last year. You said you fell while hiking. I couldn't meet her eyes. I'm sorry I lied. Don't you dare apologize, she said fiercely. Not for what they did to you. Megan stepped forward. India. I want you to know that whatever you decide about your records, you're not alone. We have resources, support systems. I consent, I interrupted. They can have all my records, and I want to make a formal statement about what happened today. As if summoned by my decision, Detective Sanders appeared in the doorway. I can take that statement now if you're up to it. What followed was the most honest conversation I had ever had about my family. I told Detective Sanders everything, not just about today's accident, but about a lifetime of incidents carefully explained away. Jake breaking my finger when I was 9, claiming I had shut it in the car door. The time he pushed me down the porch steps when I was 12, resulting in a concussion my parents dismissed as gloominess. The countless small cruelties that never left physical evidence but accumulated like poison in my system. As I spoke, a commotion erupted in the hallway. Through the open door, I saw my grandmother Elaine, arguing with my parents. You can't keep me from seeing her, she insisted, her voice carrying clearly. I've been silent too long because of you two. She pushed past them and into my room, her small frame vibrating with a fury I had never seen in her. She took one look at me and burst into tears. I'm so sorry, India. I knew, and I didn't do enough. Detective Sanders watched this interaction with interest. "Ma'am, are you family?" "I'm her grandmother," Elaine said, drawing herself up. "And I have things to tell you about Jake. Things I've witnessed over the years." My mother stepped into the room, face pale with shock. "Mother, you can't possibly." "Be quiet," Heather grandmother Elaine snapped with unexpected force. "I've watched you and Tom enable that boy's worst instincts for years. I've watched you sacrifice India to maintain your perfect family illusion. I won't be silent anymore." As my grandmother began to speak, describing incidents I had forgotten or repressed, I felt something shift inside me, a burden lifting the validation of my experiences, giving me a strength I didn't know I possessed. By the time I was wheeled into surgery the next morning, my family's carefully constructed facade had begun to crumble, and the truth, painful but cleansing, was finally coming to light. I awoke from surgery to the steady beep of monitors and the gentle pressure of a hand holding mine. For a moment, floating in the haze of anesthesia, I thought it might be my mother. Then my vision cleared, and Peyton's concerned face came into focus. "Hey there, fighter," she said softly. "Surgery went well. Dr. Reed said they stabilized your spine." I tried to move my toes, holding my breath. Nothing. The fear must have shown on my face because Peyton squeezed my hand. "Dr. Reed said, it might take time. The swelling needs to go down before they can assess anything. But the cord wasn't severed. That's good news." I nodded, throat too dry to speak. Peyton offered me a sip of water through a straw. "Your grandmother is in the waiting room," she continued. She refused to leave. "My parents," I managed to ask. Peyton's expression hardened slightly. "They're here too, with Jake, and some lawyer in an expensive suit." Before I could process this information, Detective Sanders appeared at the doorway, knocking lightly on the frame. "Is this a good time I have an update?" I nodded, and she entered, acknowledging Peyton, with a brief smile. "We filed charges against your brother for aggravated assault," she said, without preamble. "Based on witness statements and evidence, the DA feels we have a strong case." The reality of what this meant washed over me. Criminal charges, a potential trial, my family's private dysfunction dragged into public view. "What happens now?" I asked. "Jake has been processed and released into your parents' custody with conditions," Sanders explained. "He's not allowed to contact you. There will be a preliminary hearing next month, assuming you're well enough to attend. And if I'm not, the possibility of prolonged immobility loomed large in my mind." "We can work around your recovery schedule," she assured me. "The important thing is that you focus on healing." The next visitor was less welcome. Richard Wilson, the lawyer Peyton had mentioned, appeared later that afternoon. He was everything you'd expect of a high-priced defense attorney, impeccably dressed, smoothly confident, with a smile that never reached his eyes. "Miss Carson, I represent your brother in this unfortunate situation," he began, ignoring Peyton's protective glare. "I was hoping we might discuss the possibility of resolving this matter privately, without the need for costly and emotionally draining legal proceedings." "You mean you want me to drop the charges?" I translated flatly. Wilson spread his hands in a gesture of reasonableness. "Your family is deeply concerned about your recovery. They want to focus on helping you heal, not fighting in courtrooms. Your parents are prepared to cover all medical expenses, rehabilitation costs, even make accommodations to their home if needed. So I can be dependent on them again," I said. "Under their control." Wilson's smile tightened. "They're your family, Miss Carson. Despite this, misunderstanding blood is thicker than water." "Blood is exactly the problem," Peyton interjected. Her blood spilled repeatedly because of her brother's violence and her parents' denial. Wilson turned to her with practiced patience. "And you are someone who actually cares about India," she shot back. "Now, I think you should leave before I call security." After he left, Peyton helped me navigate the process of getting a restraining order against my entire immediate family. It was a surreal experience signing the paperwork that legally barred my own parents and brother from contacting me, but also strangely liberating. The weeks that followed were a blur of pain, small victories, and unexpected revelations. My body became a battleground, each physical therapy session a grueling fight to regain sensation and movement in my legs. My therapist Amber was relentlessly optimistic, but brutally honest about the challenges ahead. Spinal injuries are unpredictable, she explained during our first session. Some patients recover completely, others partially, some not at all. But I've never met a patient who didn't benefit from pushing their limits. Pushing limits became my new normal. The first time I felt a tingling in my toes, 3 weeks after surgery, I cried for an hour. The first time I managed to move my foot intentionally, Amber cheered so loudly that other therapists came running. Meanwhile, the legal case against Jake took unexpected turns. My family closed ranks around him, as they always had, but cracks in their unity began to appear. My father's business partner Tyler Matthews came forward with disturbing information Jake had assaulted a landscaper's child 2 years earlier, and my father had paid a substantial sum to keep it quiet. Tom told me it was an accident, Tyler told Detective Sanders in a statement I later read. But then I overheard him warning Jake to be more careful about witnesses. That's when I knew something wasn't right. Extended family members took sides. My father's siblings supported him unquestioningly, while my mother's sister Diane called me in the hospital, sobbing apologies for not seeing what was happening. "We all thought you were just the difficult one," she admitted. It was easier to believe that than to question Heather and Tom's perfect family narrative. My cousin Stephanie came forward with her own story about Jake threatening her at a family reunion when they were younger. "He said he'd push me off the dock if I told anyone he stole Grandpa's watch," she told Detective Sanders. "I was only 10, but I remember thinking there was something wrong with the way he smiled when he said it." Throughout this period, my parents attempted various strategies to regain control. They tried having me declared mentally incompetent to make my own medical decisions, claiming the trauma had affected my judgment. When that failed, they launched a whisper campaign among family friends, suggesting I had always been jealous of Jake and was using this accident to punish him. 6 weeks after the surgery, Dr. Reed delivered cautiously optimistic news. "The latest scans show healing progressing better than expected," she said, displaying the images on her tablet. "And your improving motor function in physical therapy is encouraging." "Will I walk again?" I asked the same question I had asked before surgery. This time her answer held more certainty. "I believe you will. It may not be exactly the same as before, and it will take continued hard work, but yes, I expect you to walk again." It was around this time that I made the decision to move in with Peyton during my recovery. Her 2-bedroom apartment wasn't ideal for wheelchair navigation, but it was a sanctuary free from the toxic dynamics of my family home. Peyton rearranged furniture, installed grab bars in the bathroom, and converted her home office into a bedroom for me without a single complaint. "This is what friends do," she said simply when I tried to thank her. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for 6 months after the incident. By then, I had progressed to using a walker for short distances, each step a victory hard won through sweat and determination. My parents filed a motion to have the hearing closed to the public to protect family privacy, which the judge denied. As the date approached, pressure from extended family intensified. "Can't you find it in your heart to forgive my Uncle Patrick?" asked during an unwelcome phone call. "Jake is just a kid who made a mistake. A mistake that nearly paralyzed me permanently," I reminded him. And it wasn't his first mistake, just the first one, with consequences he couldn't escape. The night before the hearing, an unexpected visitor appeared at Peyton's door. My mother stood in the hallway looking smaller and older than I remembered, her perfect facade showing cracks. "Can I come in?" she asked quietly. Peyton looked to me for guidance. After a moment's hesitation, I nodded. My mother sat perched on the edge of Peyton's sofa, hands clasped tightly in her lap. "The lawyers don't know I'm here," she began. "Your father would be furious." "Why are you here, Mom?" I asked, too tired for games. "I found these," she said, reaching into her purse and pulling out a stack of papers. "In the attic. I was looking for Jake's baby photos for the lawyer to show what a sweet child he was, and I found." Her voice faltered as she handed the papers to me. They were incident reports from Jake's elementary school, dating back to when he was 7 years old. Reports of aggression, cruelty to other children, disturbing drawings. Notes from concerned teachers requesting parental conferences. Recommendations for psychological evaluation. "I never saw these," she whispered. "Your father handled all school matters. He told me Jake was just high-spirited, that the teachers didn't understand boys." I looked at the papers, then back at my mother's face. "And you believed him because it was easier than facing the truth." She flinched, but didn't deny it. "I'm not asking you to forgive Jake. Or us. I just wanted you to know that I'm starting to understand what we did to you." She stood straightening her shoulders with visible effort. "I won't ask you to drop the charges. Jake needs consequences. Maybe we all do." After she left, I sat staring at the school reports, feeling an odd mixture of vindication and grief. The next morning, as Peyton helped me dress for court, I realized something fundamental had shifted within me. For the first time, I wasn't fighting just to survive my family. I was fighting to break free of them completely. The preliminary hearing went forward, despite my father's last-minute attempts to delay it. As I wheeled myself into the courtroom, choosing the wheelchair over the walker for stability during what would be a long day, I caught sight of Jake for the first time since the incident. He sat between my father and Richard Wilson, dressed in a conservative suit that made him look older than his 16 years. Our eyes met briefly, and what I saw there sent a chill through me. Not remorse or fear, but calculation. I understood then that whatever happened in this courtroom, whatever legal consequences Jake might face, the most important battle had already been won. I had escaped the prison of silence and denial my family had built around me. I had found my voice, my strength, and my truth. And nothing, not Jake's manipulations, not my parents' damage control, not even the lingering uncertainty about my physical recovery, could take that away from me. 6 months after Jake pushed me down those basement stairs, I found myself in the physical therapy room at Atlanta Rehabilitation Center, gripping the parallel bars until my knuckles turned white. Sweat dripped down my face as I concentrated on moving my right foot forward just 6 inches. A movement that once would have been unconscious now required all my focus and determination. "That's it, India," Amber encouraged from beside me. "Now the left." My left leg was more stubborn, the nerve damage more severe. I visualized the pathway from my brain to my foot, willing the signal to travel down my damaged spine. After what felt like minutes but was probably seconds, my foot scraped forward. "2 more steps and you can rest," Amber said, walking backward in front of me, ready to catch me if I fell. Those 2 steps felt like climbing a mountain, but the triumph when I reached the end of the bars was indescribable. 6 months of grueling, painful work had brought me from total paralysis to these halting steps. It wasn't pretty, it wasn't graceful, but it was movement, and movement meant freedom. "You're making incredible progress," Amber said, as she helped me into the wheelchair I still needed for longer distances. "Most patients with your level of injury wouldn't be walking at all by this point." "I'm not really walking," I countered, gesturing to the bars I depended on. "Not yet," she corrected with her trademark optimism. "But you will." The physical challenges of recovery were only part of my journey. Equally important was the psychological healing that happened alongside it. 3 months after the incident, I had started attending a support group for survivors of family abuse. That's where I met Jordan, a social worker who specialized in trauma recovery. "Families like yours function as closed systems," Jordan explained during one of our sessions. "They develop their own internal logic that seems normal to insiders but is clearly dysfunctional to outsiders. Your parents created a reality where Jake's behavior was acceptable, and your reactions to it were the problem." "Why would they do that?" I asked, genuinely confused. "They're not stupid people. My father runs a successful business. My mother managed our household like a CEO. It's rarely about intelligence," Jordan replied. "It's about psychological investment. They created an identity around being perfect parents raising a perfect son. Acknowledging Jake's behavior would have meant acknowledging their failure, which was too threatening to their self-image. So they sacrificed me instead," I said, the realization both painful and clarifying. Jordan nodded. It's a common pattern in families, with a golden child and a scapegoat. The roles get assigned early and become self-reinforcing. These insights helped me understand my family dynamics, but understanding wasn't the same as healing. The real turning point came unexpectedly when I was cleaning out the storage unit where I had kept boxes from my childhood bedroom after moving to my own apartment. Inside a dusty shoebox beneath school certificates and report cards, I found a stack of small notebooks, diaries I had kept between the ages of 8 and 15. Reading them was like opening a time capsule of pain. In childish handwriting, I had documented incidents I had long forgotten: Jake cutting up my favorite stuffed animal when I was 9, Jake locking me in the garden shed for hours when I was 11, Jake pushing me into the deep end of a pool when he knew I couldn't swim well. More disturbing than the incidents themselves were my attempts to make sense of them. Mom says Jake didn't mean it, but his eyes looked happy when I cried. Dad says I shouldn't tell Grandma about the shed because it would make her worry. I think maybe there's something wrong with me that makes Jake want to hurt me. I brought the diaries to my next session with Jordan. This is textbook gaslighting, she said, after reading a few entries. They convinced you to question your own perceptions and experiences. I actually believed I deserved it, I admitted. That if I could just be better somehow, Jake would stop hurting me. That's exactly what they wanted you to believe, Jordan said gently, because it absolved them of responsibility. Around the same time as this discovery, another piece of evidence emerged that would strengthen the case against Jake. Austin Reynolds, a former friend of Jake's, came forward with a video recording from Jake's phone. In it, Jake bragged to friends about teaching India a lesson on previous occasions, laughing as he described my injuries. Detective Sanders called to tell me about this development. The video was from about a month before the birthday incident, she explained. Austin says he felt uncomfortable about it at the time, but didn't know what to do. Seeing the news about your case prompted him to come forward. Will it help? I asked. It establishes a pattern and intent, she confirmed. And it contradicts Jake's claim that pushing you was an impulsive, one-time mistake. The preliminary hearing had determined there was enough evidence to proceed to trial scheduled for exactly 1 year after the incident. As that date approached, I continued my physical progress, graduating from parallel bars to a walker, then to forearm crutches for short distances. Each milestone was a victory in my personal battle for independence. My volunteer work became another source of healing. 3 months into my recovery, feeling isolated and seeking purpose, I had begun volunteering at a local advocacy center for abuse survivors. Despite my limited mobility, I could staff the helpline, assist with paperwork, and, most importantly, provide genuine understanding to others in crisis. You get it, one young woman told me, after I helped her file a restraining order against her brother. Most people try to understand, but you actually do. My parents made one final attempt at reconciliation 2 weeks before the trial. They appeared at Peyton's apartment, unannounced, my father clutching a thick manila envelope. We've been doing a lot of thinking, he began, after Peyton reluctantly let them in, about mistakes we've made. My mother nodded earnestly. We've been in family therapy, all of us, including Jake. We're learning to recognize patterns we didn't see before. I waited, saying nothing, as my father placed the envelope on the coffee table. We've put together a proposal, he continued. A trust fund for your ongoing medical expenses, modifications to the house, so you could come home during your recovery. Jake would go to a boarding school with a strong therapeutic program. We could be a family again, India. A real family this time. I looked at the envelope but didn't touch it. And the charges. My father hesitated. A criminal record would destroy Jake's future. He's 16. He made a terrible mistake. But should that define the rest of his life? A mistake. I repeated, the word bitter on my tongue. You're still calling it a mistake. What would you call it? My mother asked, genuine confusion in her voice. A culmination, I said after a moment. the inevitable result of years of violence that you both enabled and denied. My father's face hardened. That's not fair, India. We didn't know. You knew, I interrupted, my voice steady. You chose not to see, which isn't the same as not knowing. And you're still choosing not to see, coming here with your envelopes and your conditions, and your concern for Jake's future. Where was this concern for my future all the times he hurt me before? We're trying to make amends, my mother said, tears spilling down her cheeks. No, you're trying to make it go away, I corrected. There's a difference. Real amends would mean supporting whatever justice looks like for me, not negotiating to protect Jake from consequences. After they left, Peyton sat beside me on the sofa. Are you okay? I considered the question carefully. I think I am. For the first time, I didn't feel afraid of them. I didn't feel like I needed their approval or understanding. That's progress, she said, squeezing my hand. The best kind, I agreed. As the trial date approached, I continued pushing my physical limits, determined to walk into the courtroom under my own power. Not for my family, not even for the jury, but for myself. A demonstration of the strength I had discovered through this ordeal. The night before the trial, I stood in front of Peyton's full-length mirror, practicing with my forearm crutches, rehearsing the careful, deliberate steps I would need to take. You're going to do great, Peyton said from the doorway. And not just the walking part. I met her eyes in the mirror. I know, I said, and realized I truly believed it. Whatever happened in court tomorrow, I had already won my most important battle, the fight to reclaim my life and identity from the toxic family system that had defined me for too long. I slept surprisingly well that night, free from the nightmares that had plagued me in the months following my injury. In my dreams, I was running, easily, effortlessly, with the wind at my back and the sun on my face. I woke feeling rested and ready, not just for the trial, but for whatever came after. The future stretched before me, uncertain, but full of possibilities that were finally truly my own. The courthouse loomed imposingly against the October sky, its stone columns and broad steps designed to intimidate. I sat in Peyton's car, staring up at the building where my family's carefully constructed facade would finally face public scrutiny. Ready, Peyton asked, her hand resting supportively on my shoulder. I nodded, gathering my resolve, along with the forearm crutches that had become extensions of myself over the past months. As I'll ever be. The district attorney, Monica Patel, met us at the courthouse entrance. She was a formidable woman in her 40s, with a reputation for prosecuting family violence cases that others considered too complicated or too private. We've got a strong case, she assured me, as we made our way to the courtroom. The medical evidence, the witness statements, Jake's history of concerning behavior. But I want to prepare you. Defense Attorney Wilson is known for aggressive cross-examination. He's going to try to make this about you, not Jake. I know, I said, having spent weeks preparing with victim advocates for this moment. He'll say I was jealous, attention-seeking, mentally unstable, that I fabricated or exaggerated the abuse. Monica nodded approvingly. Exactly. But we've worked to preempt those strategies, and Judge Harmon doesn't tolerate character assassination in her courtroom. Walking into the courtroom required all my concentration. Each step with the crutches had to be deliberate. My partially recovered legs, still prone to weakness and unexpected spasms. I felt eyes on me, the jury's spectators, and most pointedly my family's. My parents sat directly behind the defense table, united in their support of Jake. Grandmother Elaine sat on the prosecution side, her chin held high despite the family division her choice represented. Jake looked different than I remembered. Older somehow. The boyish charm that had fooled so many people now hardened into something more calculated. He wore a conservative suit, hair neatly combed, the very picture of a responsible young man unfairly accused. Our eyes met briefly as I made my way to the witness stand, and I felt a familiar chill. Behind the carefully constructed mask, my brother hadn't changed at all. The trial began with opening statements. Monica painted a clear picture of long-term abuse culminating in the near-fatal incident on Jake's birthday. Defense Attorney Wilson countered with the narrative of a tragic accident caused by sibling roughhousing, exacerbated by my supposed history of instability and resentment. The evidence will show, Wilson told the jury, that India Carson has harbored jealousy toward her academically and socially successful younger brother for years. That she has a history of dramatic accusations against him that were investigated and found baseless. That on the day in question, she was upset about not being the center of attention and suffered an unfortunate accident that she's now using to punish her brother and divide her family. I had been prepared for these claims, but hearing them stated so confidently still stung. The systematic gaslighting that had defined my childhood was now being performed on a public stage. When my turn to testify came, I focused on telling my story chronologically and factually, as Monica had advised. I described the pattern of escalating incidents throughout our childhood. I explained how my parents had consistently minimized Jake's actions and blamed me for provoking him. I detailed the events of his birthday with clinical precision. The calculated whisper of "oops" before his hands connected with my back, the sickening sensation of falling the moment I realized I couldn't move my legs. Wilson's cross-examination was as brutal as promised. He produced school records showing I had struggled academically while Jake excelled. He referenced therapy sessions from my teen years, suggesting they indicated emotional problems. He implied I had invented or exaggerated incidents to gain attention. "Isn't it true," he asked with practiced concern, "that you've always felt overlooked in comparison to your brother, that you've resented the attention and praise he received?" I resented being hurt repeatedly, and having those injuries dismissed, I countered. I resented being told I was imagining things when I wasn't. I resented being gaslit by the people who should have protected me. Gaslit, Wilson repeated with a slight smile. An interesting choice of words. You've been seeing a therapist since the incident, haven't you? Learning these terms, developing this narrative. Monica objected, and Judge Harmon sustained, but the implication hung in the air, that my understanding of my own experience was somehow manufactured, rather than clarified by therapy. When my parents took the stand as character witnesses for Jake, they presented a united front of concerned, loving parents, blindsided by unfounded accusations. My mother cried at strategic moments. My father spoke earnestly about Jake's academic achievements and community service. Jake has always been sensitive, compassionate, my mother testified. Yes, he and India had normal sibling conflicts, but nothing like what she's claiming. We would have noticed. We would have intervened. And on the day of the incident, Monica asked during cross-examination. It was chaotic, my mother admitted. India was carrying the cake up from the basement. Jake went to help her. Then we heard a crash. It happened so quickly. Did you immediately check if India was injured? Monica pressed. My mother hesitated. We were concerned, of course, but India has always been dramatic about injuries. We thought she was just shaken up, even when she told you she couldn't move her legs. Children say things for attention, my mother replied, then quickly corrected herself. Not that India is a child, but old patterns persist. So, when your adult daughter told you she couldn't move her legs after falling down a flight of stairs, you assumed she was lying for attention. My mother had no good answer for that. The trial took an unexpected turn when Jake's school counselor Rachel Winters testified. She had been subpoenaed reluctantly, clearly uncomfortable with breaking student confidentiality even with a court order. Jake was referred to me 3 times in the past 2 years. For concerning interactions with other students, she testified carefully. Incidents where younger or smaller students reported feeling threatened or intimidated. And what was your assessment of these incidents? Monica asked. Rachel shifted uncomfortably. I noted a pattern of Jake using his social status to pressure others, particularly when he didn't get his way. I recommended a psychological evaluation to his parents. And was this evaluation conducted? No. Mr. and Mrs. Carson decided it wasn't necessary. Mr. Carson explained that Jake was just being a normal teenage boy, and suggested the other students were being oversensitive. This testimony visibly affected several jury members who glanced toward my parents with newly critical eyes. The most dramatic moment came on the 3rd day when my grandmother Elaine took the stand. At 78, she was still sharp-minded and dignified her hands steady as she was sworn in. Mrs. Elaine Carson, you're the mother of Tom Carson and grandmother to both the victim and defendant. In this case, correct? Monica began. Yes, grandmother Elaine confirmed. Though I don't think of them as victim and defendant. They're my grandchildren, both of them. That's why this is so painful. Can you tell us about your observations of Jake's behavior toward India over the years? Grandmother Elaine took a deep breath. I first noticed concerning behavior when Jake was about 6. He deliberately broke a porcelain doll I had given India for her birthday. When confronted, he smiled and said India didn't deserve pretty things. She continued with a litany of incidents she had witnessed Jake pushing India off a porch swing and laughing when she cried. Jake locking India in a closet during a family gathering. Jake telling other children not to play with India because she was weird and crazy. Did you bring these concerns to your son and daughter-in-law? Monica asked. Many times grandmother Elaine said, her voice breaking slightly. Tom would say, I was overreacting that boys will be boys. Heather would change the subject. Eventually, I started trying to protect India in small ways, making sure they weren't left alone together. When I visited, creating reasons to have India stay with me. Why didn't you take more direct action? Monica asked gently. Report your concerns to authorities, for instance. Grandmother Elaine's eyes filled with tears. I was afraid of losing access to both my grandchildren. Tom made it clear that if I interfered, I wouldn't be welcome in their home. I told myself I could do more good by being present, by being India's ally. But after this happened, she gestured toward me, sitting in my wheelchair beside the prosecution table. I realized that wasn't enough. My silence made me complicit. When Wilson cross-examined her, he attempted to portray her as a well-meaning but confused elderly woman who misinterpreted normal sibling rivalry. Grandmother Elaine's spine stiffened visibly. Young man, she addressed Wilson directly. I raised 3 children and have 7 grandchildren. I know the difference between siblings squabbling and one child systematically terrorizing another. What Jake did to India wasn't normal. It wasn't healthy. And the fact that my son and his wife refused to see it doesn't make it any less true. The final witness was Jake himself. Carefully coached by Wilson, he presented as remorseful and confused, a 16-year-old overwhelmed by the consequences of what he characterized as a momentary impulsive action. I never meant to hurt India, he insisted, his voice catching. We were just messing around like we always did. I barely touched her. I didn't think she'd fall like that. Did you push your sister down the stairs deliberately? Wilson asked. Jake shook his head emphatically. No, I would never. It was more like, I startled her. As a joke? I didn't realize she was so off balance. And these other allegations, the pattern of hurting India that she describes. That's not how it was, Jake said, looking appropriately distressed. We had normal fights growing up, sure, but nothing like what she's saying. I don't know why she's doing this to our family. Monica's cross-examination was methodical, designed to reveal the inconsistencies in Jake's story and glimpses of the calculation behind his remorseful facade. You testified that you barely touched, your sister Monica noted. Yet the force required to cause her to fall as she did would have been substantial according to our medical experts. Can you explain that discrepancy? Jake shifted uncomfortably. I guess she was more off balance than I realized. You also testified that you were messing around like we always did. Yet your sister has no recollection of friendly physical play between you. In fact, she describes being afraid of you physically. Why would she feel that way if your interactions were as innocent as you claim? India's always been sensitive. Jake replied, a flash of the old contempt briefly visible. She takes everything too seriously, including a spinal injury that nearly paralyzed her permanently, Monica asked sharply. As Jake's testimony continued, his carefully constructed persona began to show cracks. His answers became defensive, then hostile. When Monica pressed him about the video Austin had provided, where Jake bragged about hurting me, his composure slipped entirely. That was just talk, he snapped. Guys say stuff to sound tough. It doesn't mean anything. So, you lied to your friends about hurting your sister to sound tough. Everyone exaggerates. Jake insisted, his charm evaporating. India does it all the time. She's always been jealous of me, always trying to make me look bad. This whole thing is just her biggest manipulation yet. The jury's reaction to this outburst was visible. Several members sat back as if distancing themselves from the suddenly hostile young man on the stand. The most shocking moment came during my mother's recall testimony. Visibly distressed by the mounting evidence against Jake, she broke down under Monica's questioning. "Mrs. Carson, did you ever witness Jake harm India directly?" Monica asked. My mother's hands twisted in her lap. She glanced at my father, who gave a small warning shake of his head. Heather, Judge Harmon said gently, "You're under oath." Something changed in my mother's face then. A resolution or surrender. "Yes," she whispered. "I saw things. Small things at first. Jake breaking India's toys deliberately. Jake pinching her when he thought no one was looking. Then bigger things. I saw him push her down the back porch steps when she was 12. I saw him lock her in the shed during a thunderstorm when she was afraid. I saw." Her voice broke as she finally met my eyes across the courtroom. "I saw who my son was becoming and I didn't stop it. I was afraid of him too in some ways. Afraid of what it meant about me as a mother. And afraid of Tom's reaction if I suggested something was wrong with our son." This testimony visibly shocked my father. He stood up, as if to interrupt before his lawyer pulled him back down. Jake's face drained of color, as he realized his mother had broken the family's unwritten code of silence. The jury deliberated for just 4 hours before returning a verdict guilty on all counts. As the forewoman read the decision, I felt not triumph, but a profound sense of validation. For the first time, the truth about Jake, the truth about my family, had been acknowledged publicly, officially, irrevocably. Jake would be sentenced as a juvenile facing detention until age 21, with mandatory psychological treatment. My father was under investigation for obstruction of justice and child endangerment, and my mother sat alone in the courtroom after the verdict, looking lost and decades older than her 52 years. As I navigated my way out of the courtroom on my crutches, reporters called out questions. How did I feel about the verdict? Was I satisfied with the sentence? What did I say to critics who claimed I had destroyed my family? I paused, considering my response carefully. "Justice isn't about destruction," I said finally. "It's about truth." Today, the truth was heard and acknowledged. That's not the end of our family's story. It's the beginning of a more honest one. Outside, autumn sunlight spilled across the courthouse steps. I made my way down carefully, one step at a time, just as I had been doing in physical therapy for months. Each step was an effort, but each step was also mine, hard-won and forward-moving, taking me away from a painful past and toward a future of my own choosing. 1 year to the day, after Jake pushed me down those basement stairs, I stood at the entrance to the Resilience Center, a newly established advocacy foundation for family abuse survivors. The autumn sunlight caught the brass plaque beside the door, making the words gleam. "Healing begins with being heard." Peyton stood beside me, camera ready to capture the moment. "Want me to get one of you cutting the ribbon?" I smiled, adjusting my grip on the polished wooden cane I still needed for longer distances. The physical therapists had been right. I did walk again, though not exactly as before. My left leg remained weaker than my right, and nerve damage meant I sometimes experienced unexpected pain or numbness. But I was upright and mobile, defying the worst-case scenarios that had haunted the early days of my recovery. "Let's get a group shot instead," I suggested, gesturing to the small gathering of people who had made this moment possible. Grandmother Elaine, who had provided the initial funding for the center. Amber, my physical therapist who had volunteered to offer movement therapy for trauma survivors. Jordan, who would oversee the counseling services. Detective Sanders, who had connected us with the legal advocacy component. And most surprisingly, my mother Heather, standing slightly apart from the others, uncertainty written across her face. The year following the trial had brought changes I never could have predicted. Jake was serving his sentence in a juvenile rehabilitation facility where reports suggested he was finally receiving the psychological intervention he had needed for years. My father faced his own legal consequences for the role he had played in enabling and covering up Jake's behavior. Their marriage had not survived the strain. My mother had moved into a small apartment across town, started therapy, and tentatively reached out to rebuild some kind of relationship with me. It wasn't forgiveness exactly. That word felt too simple for the complex reality of our situation. It was more like a careful renegotiation, both of us feeling our way toward whatever might be possible between us. Everyone gather round, Peyton directed, arranging the small crowd on the steps of the converted Victorian house that would serve as the Resilience Center's home. India in the middle, of course. As we positioned ourselves for the photo, I felt a surge of emotion, not just pride in what we had accomplished, but amazement at how much had changed in a single year. From lying paralyzed on a basement floor to standing here surrounded by a community of support I had helped create. The ribbon-cutting ceremony was brief but meaningful. I spoke about my own journey and the mission of the center, to provide comprehensive support for those escaping family abuse, from legal advocacy to counseling to practical assistance with housing and employment. Several local news outlets covered the event, helping spread awareness about resources that I had desperately needed during my own ordeal. After the formal proceedings, as volunteers and supporters mingled over refreshments, my mother approached me hesitantly. "This is remarkable, India," she said, gesturing to the renovated house with its warm, welcoming interior. "You've created something important here." "Thank you," I replied, still finding it strange to hear genuine pride in her voice when speaking about me. "It's been a group effort." She nodded, her eyes taking in the resource materials displayed on tables, the comfortable meeting spaces, the play area for children. "I've been thinking a lot about why I didn't protect you," she said suddenly. "My therapist says understanding doesn't excuse, but it might help us both heal." I waited, giving her space to continue. "I was afraid all the time," she admitted quietly. "Afraid of Jake, yes, but more afraid of what his behavior said about me as a mother. Each incident felt like a personal failure that I couldn't bear to acknowledge. So I convinced myself they weren't happening, or weren't as serious as they seemed. It was easier to see you as the problem than to face what was happening with Jake." Her honesty caught me off guard. For so long I had imagined confronting my parents with their failures, forcing them to acknowledge the harm they had caused. But now, faced with my mother's painful self-awareness, I found the anger that had sustained me giving way to something more complex. "I spent years trying to make you see," I told her. "Years thinking that if I could just find the right words, the right way to explain you, and Dad would protect me." "I know," she said, eyes filling with tears. "And we should have. There's no excuse for what we didn't do." "No," I agreed. "There isn't." We stood in silence for a moment, the weight of all that had happened between us filling the space. "I don't know if we can ever have a normal mother-daughter relationship," I said finally. "Too much has happened." She nodded, accepting this reality. "I understand. I'm grateful you allow me any place in your life at all." "I'm still figuring out what that place looks like," I admitted. "But I think maybe we can build something new. Not based on forgetting or pretending, but on truth. Even when it's difficult." "I'd like that," she said simply. As the afternoon progressed, I found myself drawn into conversations with potential clients. People who had heard about the center through support groups or social media, who recognized their own experiences in my story. Each conversation reinforced the purpose behind the center's creation, ensuring that others would have the support system I had cobbled together through luck and persistence. Grandmother Elaine joined me as I took a break, sitting on a bench in the small garden behind the house. At 79, she had found new purpose in supporting the center, channeling her regret over years of insufficient action into practical assistance for others. "I'm proud of you, India," she said, patting my hand. "Not just for walking again, though that's miraculous enough, but for this, turning your pain into purpose." I had good examples, I told her. You stood up in that courtroom and told the truth, even when it meant testifying against your own son. She sighed heavily. Too late, perhaps, but better late than never. That's become my motto too, I said with a small smile. Later that evening, after the visitors had departed and only the core team remained, we gathered in what would become the center's main meeting room. Jordan raised a glass of sparkling cider in a toast. To the Resilience Center, she said, and to India, who showed us all what resilience truly means. And to new beginnings, Peyton added, built on honest foundations. As we clinked glasses, I felt the weight of the past year. The pain, the struggle, the hard-won victories settle into something approaching peace. Not the false peace of denial that had characterized my family life for so many years, but the authentic peace that comes from confronting difficult truths and finding a way forward despite them. The next morning, I arrived early at the center to prepare for our first official day of operation. The autumn sun streamed through the stained glass transom above the front door, casting patterns of colored light across the hardwood floor. I moved through the rooms, straightening resource materials, adjusting chairs, making sure everything was ready. In the small office that would be mine, I unpacked a box of personal items, a plant from Peyton, a framed photo of grandmother Elaine, and me at my physical therapy graduation, the journal Jordan had given me when I started counseling. Last, I placed a small sculpture on the desk, a figure rising arms outstretched toward the sky, crafted by an artist who specialized in representing trauma and recovery. At 9 o'clock, our first client arrived, a young woman named Ashley, hesitant and watchful, clearly expecting to be disbelieved or dismissed. I recognized the look because I had worn it myself for years. Welcome to the Resilience Center, I said, extending my hand. My name is India Carson. Why don't you come in and tell me your story? I promise you I'm listening. As we settled into the comfortable chairs in my office, I felt the full circle of my journey, from victim to survivor to advocate. The path had been unimaginably difficult, marked by betrayal and pain, but also by unexpected allies and discovered strength. I would always carry the physical and emotional scars of what my family had done, but they no longer defined me or limited what I could become. Later that afternoon, I taught my first self-defense class for survivors, modified to accommodate my own lingering physical limitations, but no less powerful for it. Standing before a group of women who had experienced family violence, I demonstrated how to stand your ground, how to use your voice as a weapon, how to recognize your own strength. Recovery isn't about returning to who you were before the trauma, I told them as we finished. It's about discovering who you can become because of it. Not despite the pain, but through it. The people who hurt us don't get to determine our worth or our future. That power belongs to us alone. As the women filed out thanking me with words, and sometimes tearful hugs, I caught a glimpse of myself in the studio mirror, standing tall, despite the cane in my right-hand face animated with purpose. In that reflection, I saw not the scared girl who had lived in fear of her brother's cruelty, not the broken woman who had lain paralyzed on a basement floor, but someone new, stronger, clearer, more authentically herself than she had ever been allowed to be. This was the greatest revelation of my journey, that sometimes what looks like an ending is actually a beginning. Sometimes what breaks you becomes the foundation on which you build a more truthful life. And sometimes, the words that start as a cry of pain, walk it off, stop being a baby, become the challenge that teaches you not just to walk again, but to run toward a future of your own making. Thank you for listening to my story. If you've ever felt silenced, dismissed, or trapped in a family dynamic where your truth wasn't welcome, please know you're not alone. There are people who will believe you, support you, and help you find your way to safety and healing. Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is speak our truth especially when, those closest to us don't want to hear it. Have you ever had to stand up for your own truth when others were trying to silence you? How did you find the strength to do it? Please share your experiences in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, Please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that they're not alone. Wishing you all the strength and support you deserve on your own journey of resilience.